Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we've got a truly fascinating visual analysis lined up for you. We're going to be looking at this striking piece of design that, at first glance, just seems to be a really beautiful evolution of cultural advocacy. But as we peel back the layers of the source material today, we are going to uncover a hidden, highly complex narrative. We're going to explore how a single image manages to weave together the struggle for bodily autonomy with a profound structural critique of the modern state. It's a provocative question, isn't it? Like, what exactly does a flag designed to represent marginalized identities have to do with family courts, capital gains taxes, and a multi-billion-dollar legal machine? Well, the answer really lies in understanding what the state chooses to protect, and more importantly, what it chooses to extract. So let's unravel this mystery together. Okay, Section 1. Unpacking the swan flag and its visual foundation. Looking at the core design, you've got those classic elements of the Progress Pride flag in the background, the rainbow stripes and the chevron, but overlaid right on top are two swans forming a heart. Now, before we get to the hidden economic meaning of those swans, our source material highlights an absolutely essential piece of civil rights representation embedded in the spectrum that we really need to define first. A key part of this modern flag's evolution is the inclusion of the intersex community. The sources are very careful to define that intersex refers to naturally occurring biological variations. We're talking about differences in chromosomes, anatomy, or hormones. It's absolutely crucial to note that this is about biological sex characteristics. It's not about a person's internal gender identity or their sexual orientation. So what's really fascinating about this specific design is the symbolism of the colors used for that intersex representation. Specifically, the yellow background and the purple circle. That yellow, it was chosen specifically as a neutral color, intentionally sitting completely outside the traditional pink and blue gender binary. And that unbroken purple circle is a direct advocacy symbol for bodily autonomy. It represents the movement to stop non-consensual cosmetic surgeries on intersex infants. Surgeries that are basically designed to force their naturally occurring bodies into standard male or female appearances. It is a really powerful demand to just be left whole. All right, moving on to Section 2, the missing monogamy layer and the societal baseline. This brings us to a really fascinating Socratic question raised in our sources. Why isn't monogamy or celibacy represented anywhere on this flag? Well, the answer highlights the exact difference between a marginalized identity and what our sources call the societal baseline. See, the flag exists to advocate for groups that lack basic legal validation. Monogamy, on the other hand, doesn't need civil rights advocacy on a flag because it's already the legally protected socially dominant default. It literally holds a virtual monopoly on state-sanctioned privileges. Just think about how the legal framework actually operates. The state exclusively rewards the two-person marriage structure with massive benefits, right? Things like joint tax filing, automatic inheritance, health insurance coverage. But here is the critical distinction made in the analysis. While the state heavily incentivizes this two-partner structure, it doesn't actually enforce permanent fidelity. Because of no-fault divorce laws, the legal system is really just regulating a financial contract. It doesn't police the vows, it just manages the assets. Which leads us into Section 3, Fattening the Financial Pig, an institutional critique. Here, the source material introduces a really fierce, objective institutional critique. Because if marriage is just a temporary financial contract in the eyes of the state, how is that contract actually managed when it breaks? The analysis maps out what it calls the fattening the pig pipeline. Step 1 is herding the wealth. The state offers these lucrative tax incentives to convince individuals to pool their assets into a massive, concentrated estate. Step 2 is the illusory union. The legal vows might say until death, but no-fault divorce ensures that union is actually highly fragile. And step 3, well, that's the slaughter. When the relationship fractures, all that wealth cannot remain intact. It has to be aggressively liquidated, triggering massive fees. The state, the analysis argues, is acting as both the breeder and the butcher. To put that into perspective, let's look at how this extraction actually happens in practice. This number perfectly illustrates the trap. Under the current tax code, a married couple can exclude up to $500,000 of capital gains profit from selling their home. But once they're divorced, that exemption drops to $250,000 per person. So to avoid this massive tax penalty, couples are basically forced to hire specialized real estate attorneys, forensic appraisers, tax professionals, the whole shebang. They have to funnel huge portions of their wealth directly into the legal industry just to salvage their own equity. The sources actually draw a really striking historical parallel here. They point out that kings, like Henry VIII, didn't use annulments just for personal reasons. They used them as deliberate tools of statecraft to fracture massive estates, destroy rival wealth, and redistribute those assets back to the crown. The critique argues that the modern equivalent of this wealth destruction isn't an executioner's axe anymore. It's court-ordered asset liquidations and massive tax triggers.
Let's move to Section 4, the Black Swan Event, a symbol of disruption.
Keeping that deep structural critique in mind, let's bring our focus back to the central imagery of the flag and how the designer visually captured this entire legal and economic pipeline. The pairing of those two swans over the flag is honestly a masterclass in dual meaning. On one hand, you have the white swan. This represents the globally recognized romantic ideal of lifelong mating and strict monogamous fidelity. It's the societal baseline we talked about, the promise of until death do us part.
But staring right back at it is the black swan. In economics and history, a black swan event is an unpredictable, highly disruptive occurrence that completely shatters an established framework. In the context of this flag and our source material, the black swan symbolizes that sudden, devastating legal asset slaughter we just discussed. It is the unexpected fracture of the estate, the triggering of the family court machine, and that ultimate extraction of wealth by the state. And finally, Section 5, a masterpiece of symbolism and a subversive critique. What we have here is a single image that seamlessly aligns two incredibly complex ideas. It uses the canvas of cultural identity and marginalized advocacy, and then layers it with a profound, almost subversive critique of state tax codes, family law, and that closed loop of institutional extraction. And the source analysis even notes how the design could be finalized to represent the complete spectrum. That distinct intersex yellow triangle and purple circle could easily be integrated right into the far-left white chevron stack. Plus, to include the asexual orientation, which, by the way, is often confused with celibacy but actually involves a lack of sexual attraction, the swan feathers themselves could be gradient shaded using the asexual flag colors. That's black, gray, white, and purple. Well, we've covered a ton of ground today, moving from the colors of bodily autonomy all the way to the historical wealth extractions of the family court system. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question directly inspired by these sources. Knowing how the state incentivizes the pooling of wealth only to turn around and profit off its fracture, how do you view your own relationship to the institutional legal machine? Are your assets truly insulated from the black swan, or are you just fattening the pig? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep asking the big questions.